Ministers of Rule, Malaysia is a fast-growing, dynamic economy, also faces some of the same challenges that Papua New Guinea is experiencing. It's a vulnerable nation. It has abundant natural resources, and I imagine you're also trying to balance the preservation of those natural resources with the imperative to take full advantage of them. How do you make sure that as you think about growing as an economy, integrating more deeply into the global economy, you do so in a way that's just and equitable, that gives you every advantage that other nations have enjoyed, but also takes care to, as the Prime Minister said, preserve the world in its natural state?
Thank you. If you look at Malaysia, and if you look at ASEAN, I mean, this year Malaysia, we take the leadership as the chairman of ASEAN. We're very much a group of economies that promotes trade. We promote trade in the belief that it brings prosperity. But at the same time, we are at different stage of development, even within as a group, let alone in the global framework. So for example, in ASEAN, we have 10 economies. One economy, GDP per capita is at $2,000. The other one at $90,000. So it's obviously when you speak within ASEAN about trade, and when you talk about certain sustainability standards to be met to get access to markets, there will be countries who are not at that stage yet. That's where we talk about just and equitable. We all have the same vision. We want to reach there. I mean, if you look at countries within ASEAN or even other countries in the world, they all have their own net zero target. But how do we get there? Even within countries like Malaysia, we have large multinationals, we have large Malaysian companies, but we also have SMEs, smallholders of plantations, etc. And they will need support. The big company will say, yeah, I'm ready, let's sign. We've just started to negotiate again our Malaysia-EU FTA, for example, but the smallholders are concerned because do they get support in terms of funding? Do they get support in terms of capacity building? The answer is yes, they will, but is it adequate? So again, just and equitable means we need to have a level playing field for everyone. Similarly, for the global trade today, you talk about tariff barriers, but there's also discussion whether some of those sustainability standards have been set. Is it non-tariff barriers? We can talk about CBAM, we can talk about other things as well. But for us, we need to engage all countries, all players, and not forget in government. We also need to ensure that politically people understand this because trade can be a bad word if it's not inclusive. So similarly, when it comes to trading with countries, when you have to meet certain sustainability standards, means that we need to ensure that we equip them. But the game, I think everyone's convinced. Well, many countries are convinced, majority of countries are convinced we need to go there. And Malaysia and many other countries in ASEAN are part of the Paris Agreement, for example. But we want to make sure that the pathway, the milestone, may not be the same for all. Maybe for developed countries, for developing countries, for LDCs, you might need to have a different speed, but the same end goal.
And you just mentioned the Paris Agreement. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that our new president pulled out of the Paris Agreement this very week. Does that change the standards? Does that lower the bar, if you will, for other countries?
Well, for Malaysia, we believe in multilateral platforms, multilateral rules-based platform, and we hope that all other countries continue to support the Paris Agreement. But it's not just countries, but also companies. I've seen some companies are now also backtracking. Maybe for commercial reasons, I don't know. But I think it's important that we stay the course. You know, we all live on one planet, that's what the Prime Minister mentioned. So we have to stick to it. For us, it's important that everyone understands why it is that we are all part of this.
Yeah, thank you very much. Minister Zafrul, final question for you, and then we may have time for one question or two. Even though we haven't said it explicitly, I think has been the tension between the short term and the long term. And in the short term, I think we all understand the benefits of global trade, the benefits of exporting and taking full advantage of a country's natural resources. And yet at the same time, there's the long-term imperative that Prime Minister has articulated, the need to preserve the earth, to preserve those natural resources for future generations. I wonder how, as Minister of Trade, you think about balancing that tension in a country that is growing fast and has such high demands, such high needs, and yet it has its eye on the long term as well.
Well, there is a trade-off, obviously. For Malaysia, we also have a big sink of forest reserve. Our forest reserve is around 54%. And if you look at the development of the various regions in Malaysia or even in ASEAN, there will be an expectation that those who keep this foreign reserve needs to be compensated. Because politically as well, they will want to make sure that their region also sees the development. That's number one. So we need to ensure that even in the longer term, when we look at regions that maintain the forest reserves, they need to be compensated. And countries that do not have that fiscal space may have problems on that. And that's where the carbon trading, the carbon credits must come into play in the longer term. Right now, I guess we need to have the standards, etc. The discussion is happening. And in fact, in Malaysia and in many countries in the region, they're already talking about carbon tax, etc. But again, it's not easy because someone has to pay for this. And to pay for this, you need to make sure that we are at the right level of development. I mean, if your GNI per capita is at that level, it's no issue, but many countries do not reach that level yet. So it's not easy to pass through the costs to consumers and to the people who are obviously not ready. Industries, they are. I think in the longer term, we're already seeing industries playing a role in this. We mentioned about FDI coming to the region. They're all demanding renewable energy. Many companies are RE100 companies, and countries who need to build that infrastructure, and we are already encouraging companies to come in and build those green investments. That's why I think on trade, when you talk about the green investment is happening, it's coming. Many countries have adopted their own green investment strategy to support industries, which will then hopefully cross-subsidize some of that cost to consumers, especially to the vulnerable groups. And finally, I think in the longer term, everyone has to be in agreement that the goal is the same goal. Because if 2 or 3 major countries divert away from that goal, then it's going to be difficult for the smaller and the middle-sized countries to then achieve what they want to achieve. Because like what the Prime Minister said, the Secretary General said, we all need to be together in this, and we can't afford not to be playing this game as a team.
Thank you, Minister Zafrul. Minister Zafrul, I wonder if you could also address the question, and I don't know if you could speak to this, but one of the things that I encounter in my reporting so often is the different interest rates and the degree to which developing nations are saddled with much higher interest rates for the kind of climate investments that are needed to realize the vision we've been talking about. Are the reform efforts that we're starting to see at the MDBs making a difference there, or are these unjust, unequitable perhaps, interest rates still a major impediment to some of the growth?
Well, I don't think interest rate is that important when you look at the investments that's coming in, and it depends. Of course, if you're borrowing US dollars, you are exposed to the currency as well as the interest rate that's decided in the US. But for markets like Malaysia, where it's deep enough, they can access capital through the local markets, and therefore it's dependent on the local rates. But having said that, I think there's 3 things which is, to answer your question. The first one is the cost. Whatever you say, the cost of renewable energy is still very high, and someone has to bear that cost. Yes, you can fund it, but funding it is also still expensive relative to conventional investments. And then secondly, if you look at investments that's coming in, if you can pass through that cost, it's okay, but it's going to be difficult. Yes, solar, for example, cost has gone down a lot because of economies of scale, etc. But if you look at hydrogen, if you look at battery energy vehicles, it's still more expensive than ICE. If that doesn't go down, then it's going to be hard for people to embrace adopting RE in everyday use. Again, it's back to cost. So governments have to play a role, like the Prime Minister said. If government can play a role, of course, they can create the right incentive framework in terms of fiscal and non-fiscal framework, tax, etc. At the same time, we can also give support in terms of grants for industries, especially in logistics or even industries to embrace circular economy. And we talk about carbon capture, utilization and storage, etc. But again, it just means that someone has to bear that cost. So at the end of the day, it's either government or consumers or the industries have to share that cost. And as long as we don't reach that kind of efficiency and productivity, that cost will still be high for renewable energy for everyone to embrace.
Thank you.